Matthew 1. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham.
Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, and Judah the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar, and Perez the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Ram, and Ram the father of Amminadab, and Amminadab the father of Nahshon, and Nahshon the father of Salmon, and Salmon the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David the king. And David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah, and Solomon the father of Rehoboam, and Rehoboam the father of Abijah, and Abijah the father of Asaph, and Asaph the father of Jehoshaphat, and Jehoshaphat the father of Joram, and Joram the father of Uzziah, and Uzziah the father of Jotham, and Jotham the father of Ahaz, and Ahaz the father of Hezekiah, and Hezekiah the father of Manasseh, and Manasseh the father of Amos, and Amos the father of Josiah, and Josiah the father of Jeconiah and his brothers, at the time of the deportation to Babylon. And after the deportation to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel, and Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel, and Zerubbabel the father of Abiud, and Abiud the father of Eliakim, and Eliakim the father of Azor, and Azor the father of Zadok, and Zadok the father of Achim, and Achim the father of Eliud, and Eliud the father of Eleazar, and Eleazar the father of Mathan, and Mathan the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called Christ. So all the generations from Abraham to David were 14 generations, and from David to the deportation to Babylon, 14 generations, and from the deportation to Babylon to the Christ, 14 generations.
We're going to start out with the book of Matthew chapter 1. And the first chapter of Matthew is basically written for those that were of the Jewish culture, those that had that heritage and background. They were looking to see if Christ was who he said he was by just the genealogy, because the Bible prophesied that the Messiah would come from the line of David. And so Matthew lays out the genealogy of Christ so that they could see, yep, that is correct, he is from that line. And Jesus did fulfill that. He did have that lineage of the genealogy that are listed here, and there are quite a few names here. Some of them are really tongue twisters, but basically some of the big names that come up are obviously David, who was the king of Israel. He had to come from the line of David, or otherwise Jesus would not be who he said he was, which he had to be the Messiah that came from the line of David. Also, but there's some listed here that you're going, wow, God really showed his understanding that man is not perfect. None of us are perfect. We're all sinful, whether we're really rich or really poor. And he took some of those that kind of, I would call like the black sheep of the family, if you will. He had prostitutes. He had people that had committed adultery, had committed some deep sin, and yet he used those in the line to have Christ come. And I think that's interesting because he chose to use the lower things of the world, if you will, to bring in through that line Christ, because we all needed Christ. We all needed to have that salvation brought to us. And he's not here to just save the healthy and those that are wealthy. He's here to save the sick and those that are poor. And so even in his own line, you see here where Jesus has those that were not as faithful or as not looked up to as some of the others in his lineage. Four names of women is very interesting here. He includes Rahab and Ruth, who were not actually Jewish at all. They were Gentiles. So it wasn't a pure line of just a Jewish background. They were also Gentiles, which obviously showed that God wanted to graft and bring in the Gentile, those that are not Jewish, basically, from their heritage or their background. So he picked those two. Tamar and Bathsheba were both Jews. But he also picked, like I said, some that were not so great in the eyes of man, including Rahab, who was a harlot. And he picked Tamar and Bathsheba, who both committed adultery. So these were not pure, holy, sinless people that God chose to have his line come through, which just again shows his mercy and his grace is sufficient to be spread to anyone. And those that are looking today, if you haven't had a perfect background, you've committed adultery, or you might even be a prostitute, God has mercy and grace for you, and that's what he does even in this line to represent where he came from, the line of Christ. And maybe in your genealogy, if you look back just a few generations, maybe your grandpa or your father or your mother were into some things that you're not really proud of as your family. Well, so did Christ. So did Jesus. His background was not perfect, and the reason not was because God didn't come for a perfect world. He came for a lost world, a world that needed Christ. And so even in his own lineage, he chose to have that imperfection show up. So basically, there you have the 42 generations listed. They're not all there. It is a consensus of what was basically his background.